Hello, everyone. I wish to acknowledge before we get started that the land in which I'm hosting today's discussion is from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Ushabek, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I also want to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many different places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional and unceded caretakers of those lands as well. So thank you and welcome to today's discussion. Today's Real Talk is about equality and diversity and inclusion, really taking the action towards making change. Now, many organizations, nonprofits, governments, communities around the world are coming together in an unprecedented global movement for racial justice. Now, we must recognize, though, that an essential role of mental health is the conversation and the commitment. Now, today I'm honored to be joined by individuals that bring not only their professional hats of expertise to the discussion, but they also bring inspirational personal stories and experience with them. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Amanda Kennedy, is unable to join us today, and she does send her deepest apologies. Now, Amanda is Haudenosaunee and an Indigenous woman innovator. She's an activist, an advocate, a business coach, and a mentor for many Indigenous youth and women. She is also the founder of 2 social enterprises as well as a youth digital hub. Amanda truly embodies the truth of empowering nations and facilitating change through education. We wish her a speedy recovery. And with that said, though, I'd love the opportunity to welcome the panelists that we do have joining us today. And totally grateful to have all of you with me. So thank you and welcome to the discussion, and thank you for your time. And I'd love the opportunity for you to introduce yourself as well as share to those that are listening a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Tina Gandy. I'm a social worker. I work in the community, and I work a lot with families of children with autism, children who have been experiencing mental health issues. I've worked in child welfare with a diverse amount of diverse families who've experienced so much racialized trauma and are going through so many things. So my philosophy is, of course, meet families where they're at and work with the kids and talk to them about some of their struggles. There's been lots of mental health issues. The other thing that I do is I provide assist training for people. So anybody dealing with suicide or training staff in suicide or the community, that's something I'm very passionate about, is mental health awareness and preventing suicide in the community. I've done it many times for a lot of communities to help support the needs. And then just something fun about me is I like to Zumba. I love to dance. So like to do that for the community and make people feel better. So
Wonderful.
That's me.
Thank you.
Hi, Christina, Dawn, Tina. It's a pleasure to be in community once again. Welcome to all the listeners and viewers out there who are from around the globe. I appreciate you for dropping in. There's probably a number of other things you could be doing with your time right now. So the fact that you decided to invest in us really says a lot about your interest and engagement on the topics that we're going to cover today. My name is Shirley Lay. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the eldest daughter of Juan Venancio Lay and Wailin Lay, who are immigrant settlers from Mexico and Hong Kong, respectively. I work as a social justice informed psychologist who is licensed in Oregon in the US. Currently, I consult for an executive search firm called BIPOC Executive Search. So BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous, peoples of color, peoples of culture. Sometimes I interchange it with peoples of the global majority. And there I work as a consultant to recruit, to do training, and also to do equity, diversity, and inclusion training to ensure that we create work cultures that are just and equitable. So to give you a little bit of a verbal descriptor of what I look like, I have black hair, I have beige skin, I have a turquoise blazer on, and in my back there's a leafy portrait that just hangs on my wall. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you very much, Shirley.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here with Tina, Shirley, Christina. This is a pleasure once again. Thank you for inviting me again, Christina. I get to learn, I get to listen, and I get to feel the vibes. My name is Don Van. I am a mental health advocate studying to be a social worker like Tina one day, maybe, you know, just help the community. I have groups that I was running, which has been on pause for men that are struggling, men that want to be vulnerable and courageous. I am a Black man that has revolutionized the way I think, and I'm trying to revolutionize manhood by sharing my story and letting mental health be okay, not just a taboo subject that we discuss in our community. And what I look like, I'm tall, dark, handsome. Today, my allergies are going out of control right now, so my eyes look really tired. But inside, I feel okay.
Good. I'm so thankful to again have all of you with me today on what can be a very heavy conversation for some. And now we rarely talk about mental health in the context of this very complex world in which we live. And there's so much pain in the world today due to recent events. And so much of it is coming from a place of exclusion, a place of racism, and even a place of hatred. A feeling not entirely unfamiliar to most of us. Now, there are many facets to who we are. And as my panelists have clearly described themselves for you, there's much of who we are is a lot of how we experience the world in which we live. Our complex realities are not standalone entities. They intersect with each other. This intersection can often make us oppressed in different spaces and privileged in some. Now, mental health, we've always been told and educated on, is a spectrum of experiences, and that range from different people with different backgrounds and different experiences. Now, every demographic group and those at their intersections experience mental health differently. It doesn't change the fact that having the conversation in an honest way is as important. Now, one natural tendency of humans is to see everything from our point of view. But without counterbalancing that, by taking the perspective of someone else, by taking the perspective of others, we can actually continue to create various forms of inclusion. Now, today's discussion is about mental health and exploring different ways of having those conversations, of exploring ways that each of us as individuals, as parents, as friends, as families, as colleagues, as community members, can all do our part. Not only to take away the stigma that surrounds mental health, but more importantly, work towards the change that needs to happen towards inclusion. Now, some of you may have been part of our previous Real Talks, and thank you again for joining us. And in those, we talked a lot about building awareness around mental health, looking at challenging assumptions and stigma around that conversation. I want that conversation to always continue beyond today. And with that said, we need to remind ourselves of the importance of having that conversation. Why is it important? Why is it important to be honest and open about those conversations? And then now with today and what's going on and how we're all feeling about certain incidences and events that have happened around the world, we also need to have those heavy conversations about presenting issues of our time. So Dawn, I'm going to actually ask you first, if you don't mind. Why do you think it's important to have these conversations, especially today?
Why is it important to have these conversations? Because that's a great question. I think in my community also too, we feel, I'm going to say this really honest, there's a sense of oppression. We feel distance. We feel angry inside, and we feel like we are alone. I mean, that's why now Black Lives Matters all over the place. I mean, a lot of people, lives matter, but Black lives do matter. When you get to talk and we have this conversation, it can open up a door to positivity, to hope, to change in the future, to let us join forces together as human beings, right? Let us be heard and not feel like we're always going to be oppressed and not equal. You know what I mean? This is why it's so important now more than ever before. My son, I have to talk to him. He's mixed. He's half European, half Black. Sometimes he gets confused. Dad, am I Black? Am I European? He's a mixed boy. He's a human being, but he needs to learn both sides of the culture. And we need to learn and understand one another to join forces. And we can't just learn because, oh, it's my job. It's because you have a passion to do it and you want to do it and you want to learn. And Martin Luther King said, I always said, you should not be judged by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. And that's what we're doing. And that's why I'm here right now to share what I've learned, not just to be an angry Black man, but to be a strong man who could spread awareness and share my story too.
Thank you. And you bring up a valuable point with regards to, responsibilities and duty. And, before I present the question to the other panelists, it's important for us to remind ourselves that there is a difference between the two, right? A duty is something that is imposed on us. A responsibility is something that we choose to take on. And part of, doing such a discussion on a topic that can be quite sensitive right now is the time to do it. There is no right time. Every time is the right time to have these conversations. And we need to get comfortable with it. We need to look at the various platforms that we have access to have these conversations so we can build the awareness and we can share in reigniting empathy and compassion for each other. So, Tina, what do you think with regards to the importance of having conversations like this? Forward.
Absolutely. There is the time. So I work with the families. I work with youth. I work with a whole bunch of populations. The time is always important. And having a conversation about mental health. So let's just break some of the stigma. So if you say, I have to go see a social worker for counseling, everybody's like, what is that? That sounds crazy. So no, nobody's crazy. Let's talk about how you're stressed. Let's talk about the things that are bothering you. What's getting in the way of what you want to do in your life? Like just using that kind of user-friendly language to make people feel comfortable, to reduce that stigma, to kind of get everybody from different backgrounds and cultures, and let's have the conversation about what that feels like. And then we can talk about words like anxiety and depression, but let's not focus in on that. Let's just have that conversation and see where people are at. So absolutely, I think having the conversation here and now, this is how you're talking to me about suicide. We're going to talk about suicide because that's what you're telling me. And I'm not going to ignore that. I'm not going to walk out that door until I know exactly that you're safe. And it's okay to have that conversation. I'm not going to make you suicidal. We're having the conversation because you're telling me this is what's going on for you. It's is real. This is important. And it's always important to me. So I never tell a family that their concerns are not important or their feelings are not important or what's happening isn't real. We know all the systemic barriers. We know the racialized trauma. We know that these things are important and real. And if that's how somebody feels, then that's important to me too.
Exactly. And that's the thing. We're not naive to what is going on. We see it in the news, we see it in our workplaces, we see it in our communities. And though the one thing that I think is really important to highlight when it comes to these conversations, and Tina, you touched upon it with regards to language, right? The language we use, the verbiage we use, it's not about the intention we have behind what we're saying. It's about the impact we're having in the words that we're choosing to use.
Yes.
And I stress choosing to use. If we become more mindful of others and their potential experiences and their potential difference in opinions, and just knowing that that's a possibility, we might be able to redefine our way of approaching something, or approaching these conversations around mental health, or even being of support or an ally to a culture, to a marginalized group that we may not have familiarity with. It comes down with knowledge. It comes down with education. So Shirley, what's your take on the importance of having conversations like this?
Thanks, Christina, for the great question. And before I jump into it, I wanted to contextualize and embed my answers within my social positionality, right? So these are the identity markers that I carry. So I identify as a cis, straight, able-bodied person who has had the privilege of attending post-secondary, right? So those are my areas of privilege, and as a result, I'm going to carry biases concerning those pieces. But the parts of me that I'm very aware of, my identity as a woman of color, as somebody who's identifies as Chinese, and somebody who comes from a working class background, with illiteracy in generations of my household, that's where I come from. So I want to let people in the audience know that not everything that I share today will be suitable for you, or even make sense to you. So just take the pieces that are useful and then leave everything else behind. I'm not attached to anything, and I'm always willing and open to hear other ideas. But going back to this question of why this is the time now, and I guess I'll contextualize it within an organizational, an institutional perspective. We have a lot of organizations that put their vision and their mission front and center, right? It's often the first item that comes up on their website. Yeah. What happens is that when they start to engage in what they believe to be social activism work, right? So they will talk about injustices and talk about allyship on social media, on news media. But then how they treat their employees is a different story, right? We have so many racialized peoples who come out and say, hey, you are indicating that you're in support of racial equity, but there is no justice here internally, right? I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard. And so there's a lot of organizations, as we've seen worldwide, being called out. Employees are giving evidence of why it is that they feel oppressed in that workplace, and that it is not aligning with their goodwill gestures, things that they are putting out as performative allyship. So that's certainly one thing that I think is important as to why organizations and institutions need to focus on this now. There is so much accessibility with respect to information, communicating information. It's really hard to hide injustices that are happening internally. The second piece I want to say is that if companies are interested in retaining good talent, right? And a lot of BIPOC individuals, people from the global majority, we have a lot of talent to bring. We have a lot of potential that is not tapped into, right? So if you are invested in creating an organization that is filled to the brim with talent, I would say focus on equity, diversity, inclusion, and belongingness issues so that you can continue to attract and retain. Right? Retain meaning keeping them at their organization in a nourishing way so that they remain with the organization, that they're not coming in and out constantly. And then the final piece I want to add is that we have substantial societal issues, right? The first and forefront would be the pandemic, right? Then we have racial injustices. Women continue to experience violence in the workplace, at home. There's poverty, there's global warming, there's all these major issues. And we need to invite people from people, the global majority, to come in to tap into their talents to resolve these issues. If we continue to take the cookie cutter approach in resolving societal problems, we're going to get the same results, right? So I think one of the things that I hope people on this call can take away is that if you are a marginalized, minoritized, racialized individual, know that you have tons of potential, but the reason why it is not being expressed is because there are not environments like the ones I just described that need to showcase your work.
It's also about, something, again, all three of you have mentioned it, and we have mentioned this when we are solely talking about mental health and building awareness, is conversation, is talking about it. Whether you are the one experiencing it, use your voice. Whether it's the one that you are witnessing it, use your voice. When it comes to the power of change, it comes from us being aware of what needs to change. If we're not aware of it, then what are we actually changing? Conversations like this is bringing to the forefront much needed aspects, not only within our communities, but within organizations and overall society, that we can all be a part of that change. But it starts with conversation. And it starts with being able to have that conversation without bringing in shame, without bringing in judgment, and just simply bringing the ear to listen to someone else's perspective and being open to learn. Now, I know that for some, trying to have these conversations can be difficult. And, exploring in the previous Real Talks, we talked about how do you start that conversation, just even in general mental health discussions. And then we had a Real Talk specifically around children and youth. So how do we have that conversation? Now, I'm not saying that there's this cookie cutter, to use Shirley's term, of how to do that. And though there are ways of not only do we get comfortable with, but also that others can be comfortable in sharing their experiences and their perspectives. So from an organizational, institutional perspective, Shirley, how do you think, and what sort of ways would you suggest those conversations start?
Yeah, great, Christina. Thank you for the question. So I think some of you listeners, viewers might be waiting for, like, here are 5 steps that you can take to have this conversation with somebody. But I would say, I'm not going to give those 5 steps, just to let you know. What I'm going to give is the 5 steps before you take that 5 steps, right? Before you even have these conversations. So one of the things that is important within an organization is that they reflect deeply on their own complicity in anti-Black racism, in anti-Latinx racism, in anti-Asian racism. Right, first start with that, right? Any internalized homophobia, Islamophobia, first sit with that. We are all complicit, right? Even though I'm a racialized person, I am needing to continually to work on my own internalized racism, right? I need to understand that I was born in this social hierarchy, in this caste system, like Resmaa Menakem. He's an African American, healer and a social justice advocate. He talks about this vertical hierarchy where we have white culture, whiteness, Western Eurocentric ways of being at the top, and then at the bottom we have Black individuals, we have Indigenous individuals, and then the rest of us fall somewhere along that power structure. And so for me, my work involves eradicating my own internalized supremacy, right? Internalized white supremacy, where I tend to defer to whiteness or align with whiteness, or I might perceive them as superior beings. So I would say within an organization, step 1, really understand your complicity, your involvement, because we all have it. The second is understand your own bodily symptoms, signals with respect to conversations like these. There is no one on this earth that comes in to talk about racism and sexism, heterosexism. There's no one that can come into this conversation feeling like nothing, right? Like, these are really charged, politicized topics. So your body's gonna have some kind of reaction. My reaction in particular is that my throat tightens, my chest tightens, and then I just want to like scream and yell and just say it all and put it all out there. But it's that urgency, right? It's that like compulsion to like say or do something that is when we're going to slip up. So really listen to your internal signals as to what those signals might be, what the charge is for you, and just sit with that. Just keep sitting and keep learning and keep understanding what that charge is before you do anything. So that kind of work can be done institutionally, right? As a group, when you pull employees together. The third is that you need to feel safe to have these conversations, right? So a white, cis, straight, able-bodied man may have more comfort talking about certain things than me as a racialized woman, right? I may not have as much power to speak within a group. So in an organization, I would definitely encourage leadership to understand the different power dynamics in the space and to know that not everybody has the comfort to speak up and to speak up all the time. Mm-hmm. And finally, is once you've done all that work, then you dig deep and you find the best parts of you, and you move from there. Then you have those conversations. And I'm going to end with a bell hooks quote. Love is beautiful. They say, how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed, right? So it's so easy to call out, but then we rely on those people who we call out to create those changes. So I'll end with that.
You've left me speechless, actually, because that quote really captures exactly what we are trying to do. I am a privileged white female. This is a platform that I have access to, that we need to utilize to have these conversations and not shy away from them, no matter how difficult it is for me or how difficult it is for anyone listening. It's the only way to learn. And it's the only way to contribute towards the change that we want to see. So Shirley, you spoke a lot about, yes, the steps that need to happen before they need to happen with regards to just even individuals digging deep into their own, whether it be their own identities, their own privileges, or even their own barriers in which they experience. So Dawn, from an individual perspective, what do you think individuals can do beyond what Shirley has already shared towards starting these conversations?
I don't know if I could even say anything after Shirley just taught me a new lesson right there. Like, you just taught me a lesson that I never even thought about that stuff before, Shirley. Like, stuff like, wow, I'm just blown away. But I think I'm gonna ask you to ask me the question one more time so I can really think about this. Please ask me one more time.
Yeah. What do you think as individuals we can all do our part in starting these conversations?
Oh boy. First, okay. So knowledge, I always use the word that knowledge is powerful, right? Knowledge, when you gain knowledge and when you gain understanding, things change. That's one of the things we really have to do. Gain knowledge, read the books. Like there's a book called, it's something about slave syndrome. Like, we just have to open up and read those books to gain an understanding and a knowledge, right? I was an angry man before that would have never answered this question like this. Mm-hmm. I would say, just stop racism. Black people don't get help with mental health. You guys are just this and that. But I had to change that and read and gain the knowledge and gain an understanding and empathy. Don't be sympathy. Oh, look at the Black people out there. They're hurting. Empathy is understanding. Saying, you know what? Maybe I don't understand completely, but I want to learn. You got to be empathetic and open up and share what's really going on inside and say, so I want to learn and connect with you. And for even the Black people also too, we have to unlearn what we learned, right? We really have to unlearn the things we learned before. And that takes a lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of understanding, a lot of growth. And that's going to take, and like the 5 steps, she didn't say the 5 steps, which I love. I've never had someone answer the question, what are the 5 steps? You put it like that. Before even doing the 5 steps, do this. But you pretty much answered everything. But we need to, as a Black community too, understand that we are worth something and we are special, and we need to connect with everyone, no matter the color of your skin, and just open that book, understand, listen to these programs. That's all I got right now after Shirley said all that stuff. She just taught me a lesson. That's amazing.
And again, it sort of highlights that today's conversation isn't about hand slapping or pointing fingers or judgment or shame. It's about acknowledging that we don't know what we don't know.
That's right.
But we need to embrace the fact that we don't know everything, and we never will, but we're open to learning more. So we can become better versions of ourselves tomorrow, and then learn more, and then be the best version the next day. And with that, again, comes conversation. It comes the openness, the willingness to, put those walls down and be open to learning more and taking on those perspectives just to understand it. You will never truly understand another one's experience. You will never truly be able to walk in another person's shoes. That is not possible. But at least you can understand from their perspective how their shoes are. So Tina, in working with families specifically, and we do have a lot of parents that do listen in, how could they start conversations?
Well, I think just trying to figure out where your kids are at and just having that open dialogue and the conversations that I even have with people and parents is, how can I best support you right now? What do you really need from me? And like you just said, talking about what their experience was, like this might be different for you, and we can't make assumptions, right? So I always start with that, like, how can you may have worked with people before, but how can I be best supportive to you? And how can I hear your story? What would be the most helpful, what's not helpful, and just sort of breaking that, all those stigma and around having those conversations and just being as open as we can, because sometimes we can't always get to what our kids needs, but is this person helpful to talk to? Who are your supports that you feel like you could talk to? But not having any judgment too, I think is important. And it's really hard to do that. I know that those conversations are really tricky and they're not easy, but maybe that's when you do need somebody else to come in, especially during COVID. Like, this is such a tough time for a lot of families. Like, do we need to bring in a social worker? Do you need someone else to kind of help navigate? Because it's not always easy to talk about all the things that are going on. And we don't fully understand everything that the kids are experiencing right now. We know people are feeling isolated. People are feeling alone. They're frustrated. Certainly more levels of frustration are happening right now. I'm definitely hearing constantly higher levels of frustration from everybody. So I think, everybody's coping and stress is through the roof right now, which makes it really, really difficult. But that's just trying to think about, maybe I do need to seek some help. Maybe I do need to have someone to talk to about all the stressors I'm having. Certainly my phone's ringing off the hook all the time, or people are messaging, so there's always somebody who needs something. I know that for a fact, that there's a high need.
Yeah. And again, we know that there's a lot of things that we can all do to be mentally healthy, to be supportive of others' mental well-being. And that, it's again, something that we see on social media, on the news, the government's, thrown money into various mental health supports. And though we need to always appreciate that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to mental health. And even with regards to appreciating that, we all have different identities, right? We all have different cultures that we bring. And culture isn't only about ethnicity or race. There are other aspects that create our individual cultures. And it plays a role in our perspective of things. It plays a role in how we experience things. So it really highlights that we need to embrace more powerful strategies, frankly, to promote mental health to various communities in order to build off of what we already know. And what we already know is when we are supportive, when we are listening, when we are engaged, and when we exude empathy, a lot can happen in a positive way. We know this. We need to bring that to everything else that we do. So I sort of slowly touched upon culture. And again, there's many unique challenges that various individuals, as well as groups of individuals, communities, do experience when it comes to mental health and well-being. And though it's important to sort of appreciate that, again, culture does have an impact on mental health. So, Shirley, what do you think is really important for people to sort of take away as a take-home message as to the significance, the vital, critical component that culture does and can play within one person's mental health and well-being?
Thanks, Christina. So to answer this question, I invite everyone to think about the organization or an institution that you're at, right? Whether it be at a school, in a high school, higher ed, or maybe you're employed and so you're working at a certain organization. Within each organization has its own culture, right? And then that culture is embedded in our larger societal culture. Right? So what's important to understand is that you need to know the waters that you're swimming in, right? You're fish in water and you're just swimming along. You don't know you are a fish in water until you're taken out, and then you take a look at the lake or maybe the fishbowl and you go, whoa, that was the environment that I lived in. So that's the type of engagement I want everyone to endeavor on, right? Take yourself out of water. And it's going to be hard, right? You're born with gills, and so you might find it difficult to breathe. Sometimes we might use the analogy of you're woken up from deep sleep. Nobody wants to get woken up from deep sleep, right? Your first reaction is anger, like, whoa, why are you doing this? And you just want to go back to sleep. And even when you get woken up, you might be kind of groggy, right? Slow to start. So just know that this kind of like examination of one's culture is hard work, and it is okay to take it slow. Now, once you're woken up or you're fish out of water and you want to take a look at it, I want to invite people to start noticing some of the aspects of our Canadian culture, or even in the culture of the institution that you're at. Right. So we live in a Western white settler, colonial, Eurocentric culture. Right. So that means that patriarchy is valued, right? Those who are men and male identifying or often have advantages or privileges that people who are trans women, who are cis women, who are female identifying might not have. Right. And we also live in a culture that values hyper individuality. Right. Everyone is asked to take care of their mental health using their own resources. And if you cannot take care of your mental health, that there's something wrong and off with you. Right. That very individualistic, attributing responsibility always to the individual. We live in a really capitalistic world. So we are only as good as the amount that we produce. Once we stop producing, we're considered no good, right? Just think about the elderly of our society, right? How much actually does the government invest in our elderly? And as we've seen from the pandemic, apparently not so much, because they were one of the first groups to be hit really, really, really hard, right? The pandemic ravaged them in long-term care homes, residential homes. So the idea of capitalism is really baked into our system. Then there's ableism. Again, tying into capitalism, you're only as good as if you're producing. It's we live in a heterosexist world, right? So those who are straight identifying gets their perspectives and values plastered all over our world, right? Those who are from the queer community, LGBTQ community, they are less seen in this world. Their values are less represented. And so for people who don't fit nicely into those categories, what happens is that there's a sense of internalized inferiority, right? So it means that I'm not good enough. I'm not working hard enough. That's why I can't make it. There's a lot of self-doubt. You might not even know who you are as a person, right? I've worked with so many people where they don't really have an identity. Their identity is based off of what capitalism has told them, what this ableist society has told them. But they have not been given a chance to really affirm their humanity and to reinstate their voice. And so what happens is that a lot of individuals will get treatment and they'll present with depression and anxiety. And then they'll just chalk it off as saying, I'm a depressed and anxious person. Right? When really, in reality, there's so many systems of oppression that has led to their illness and is still maintaining their illness. And it's done so good at brainwashing them that they have now said, it is my fault that I'm feeling this way. So my recommendation for minoritized, marginalized individuals is to begin to externalize some of these responsibilities that they don't belong to you. And as Resmaa Menakem says, that you are not defective or inferior to.
And it takes such courage beyond recognition. And that's what we need to also validate, right? Quite often, again, when you are in a position of privilege, you don't see where the disadvantages are. It unfortunately creates a tunnel vision. And discussions like this, organizations doing EDI training, and a lot of other initiatives of allyship that we do see are not to go ignored. There is a benefit to them. There is a positive to them. And though it is really, truly important that we do not invalidate the pain that we cannot understand. Now, we've been given our mark, and I do want to be able to have some time for questions for our listeners. And though one thing that is really important to discuss before we move to questions is, how do we promote change moving forward? What are we able, no, let me rephrase that. What should we do to promote change moving forward, to create the best future for our younger generation, for our current generations that we possibly can? I talked a lot about responsibility versus duty. Shirley mentioned about responsibility. Tina mentioned with regards to families, and again, that they becoming a role model for their children. There is a domino effect in existence to everything that we do. We have a sphere of influence that we all have control over. And our behaviors and our choices are solely within our control. So when thinking about, not necessarily actionable steps, but more of important actionable actions that we can take, what would those look like? So Tina, what would you want families, want parents, frankly, want anybody that's listening to really know as to what they can do to promote the change moving forward beyond today?
Sure. So the most important thing, and I think you spoke about that, was the feeling of validation. So what that and what that really means is feeling accepted and feeling heard. So very important for us to say things like, this is a real struggle for you. I understand. I hear your concerns. And I actually, at work, I say that a lot too. I'm like, you know what? The family doesn't need solutions. They just need someone to tell them that this is a really difficult time. And I hear how this is so stressful for you. And it seems strange, but that's all they're looking for. And you can just see the families, like, they just reassured and they feel calmer just with that simple thing. But it seems complicated to a lot of people, but it's something that I do naturally. Including that whole family. So sometimes you think of the family, the parents and the kid, but what about sometimes people live with extended family? Somebody maybe has a cousin that they're really close to. Well, that's part of their family. So including everybody they think is in their circle, expanding the community. So a lot of people feel really close to either religious community or cultural community or whatever community that sense that you have, that's your people. And those are the people you want to connect with so that the person feels more supported and understood. So, just having this wraparound of people that can kind of help support you. I think that's really important. I talked about earlier about that use of language. So when we have these real conversations, we're not using a lot of I hate when people use jargons. I hate when they use acronyms. I hate when we're trying to lose people by saying, we know this, this, and this, we're smarter than you. No, we're going to speak in language that you understand. And when we work with you, we're not going to make things more complicated. We're going to speak in clear and plain terms. And I always ask, do you understand? Do you have concerns? Do you have questions? Because I don't want you to feel like people are throwing a lot of acronyms and complicated words at you and you don't even know what they're talking about. And just trying to reduce the stigma and, just having more groups and things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you. And again, part of that is also about, looking at meaningful approaches towards really enhancing the quality of these conversations. When I say quality, it's you can sit there and have back and forths, but if there is truly no impact or those moments that make you question, then really how valuable was that conversation towards acknowledging, something needs to change, or
yes,
I didn't really think of it that way. If there is no question that you're asking yourself, then what learning actually occurred?
Exactly.
So, right? And again, you bring up a point of like the overall community, and we need to appreciate again that there is so many layers to an individual, but there's so many layers to support.
Exactly.
And that it's not our place to dictate to someone else what that might look like for them, but it is our place to listen to them, to understand what is best for them, with them, not for them, but with them. And that's sort of another aspect that really needs to be highlighted, is that much of the change that needs to happen, that we acknowledge needs to happen, that we're discussing needs to happen. Yes, we each as individuals have our role to play, the responsibility that we have. And though we need to be aligned together moving forward and really not make change for someone else, but let them make the change for themselves. Does that make sense?
It does.
So Dawn, when it comes to like sort of looking at individuals and wanting to sort of see what changes someone can do to promote and move forward beyond today, what would you suggest for them?
Well, first of all, it's going to be really hard in the Black community. And I'm talking about the Black community because I want them to get more help. I have a lot of compassion for them. But when I talk about Black men, there's going to be a lot of rejection towards getting help because we feel we're really strong. We feel we're like Hercules and nothing's wrong with us. And growing up as a Jamaican man, you bring up the word depression and mental health, there's something wrong with you. I'm going to say to my own Jamaican slang, don't talk about that. That is not right. That is demonic. It's a spiritual thing too. We reject that. If I have a men's group, I'm probably usually the only Black man there. And I want to just find ways now. And I'm going to learn how to make Black men be vulnerable and courageous. So that's what we need to do. We need to show them they can open up. We need to teach them and give them some compassion and empathy to realize, listen, I know you've been taught this, but this is what we need to unlearn and learn something new. It's hard work, but we have to do it and show vulnerability is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Yes, yes, and yes. So very true. And it also speaks to a lot of what Shirley shared earlier with regards to the steps that organizations need to take before they actually take those 5 steps. And what I'd love to do is sort of open the floor to gather questions from our audience in the background. So please do fill out some questions, type them in, and we'll filter them to our panelists. And though as those questions are coming in, Shirley, what can organizations and institutions do? You know, and I know you've shared so much already as to what needs to be done. To promote change moving forward and really create a more equitable and really best future for our younger generation?
Yeah, great question. So I always invite people to dig deep when they're doing equity, diversity, inclusion work, and they want to participate in part of the social movement. In order to sustain yourself in this very difficult work that's going to last generations on end, right? It's not going to be done by tomorrow. You need to have a strong why. There's a lot of people who go into this work and saying, my why is because I feel guilty, I feel bad, I sympathize, or I want to be a good person. I would say that those are not strong enough whys. People who are marginalized and minoritized do not need sympathy or pitying, right? How dignifying to be received as somebody who is needing of charity, to feel human, right? And so I want to put another quote out there, and this is by Mary, artist and an educator. And she said, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together. Right? It has to be that deep. What is your stake in equity seeking work? I do this because my own liberation is tied to this. When I uplift someone's voice, I feel uplifted. I feel seen, even if I'm far in the background, not even seen in the picture. There's something about seeing someone affirm the humanity, affirm their potential, understand their inherent human worth that allows me to be seen. So we have that shared tie of oppression, of knowing what it does to our sense of humanity. So my recommendation is to go that deep rather than stay on the superficial, because I'm FOMO, everyone's doing it, so I got to do it.
I didn't expect us to use the term FOMO in this discussion, but it's so true. Despite the diversity of experiences in mental health, right, across racial, ethnic groups, communities, what remains true is the clear and negative impact that discrimination actually has on mental health, regardless of what someone's upbringing is, their coping styles, their social support, or even their ethnic group identity. And part of the change that needs to happen, as all of my panelists have shared, is that exploration in oneself and digging deep and being vulnerable, being open, being honest, and frankly, just being direct in wanting to authentically be part of the change and exploring and educating yourself on how to do that. Authenticity is really where it needs to come from. It's not about check boxes. It's not about checklists. It is truly being the difference by taking that responsibility on and learning how to be part of the change towards the future. Now, today, I've been truly humbled and blessed and thankful for all the contributions that my panelists have contributed to this discussion. And I have never had such a more motivational and inspirational discussion on a conversation that, frankly, I came in expecting to be quite heavy. And I'm walking away feeling more inspired to do my part, to continue the journey that I'm on in learning more about my own privilege and how I can be an authentic ally towards the change that I acknowledge need to happen and need to be educated on what to do to make it happen. So I thank you all for educating me further, educating those that are listening to also do their part. So, a call to action to those listening. Ask the questions, explore your identities, explore your privileges. Don't shy away from them. Meet someone new, learn their perspectives, learn their history, learn who they are, not by what you see, but what they share. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today and spending your lunch hour, for most of you, with us. Thank you to the panelists for spending the time that you have, and for all that you do and for all that you are. So even though Amanda wasn't able to join us, on her behalf, miigwech. Now, for everyone that is listening, our next Real Talk is actually going to be July 22nd, and it's going to be Winning at the Game of Life. We have a variety of panelists that are from the professional sports sector that will be talking about the challenges around mental health in sports, not only the pressures that really go unseen. So it's really pulling back the curtain on sports. So I'm thrilled to have a panelist that quite timely with the Canadian Olympics. Well, our Canadian team, I should say, not just the Canadian Olympics. The Olympics starting. Two of our panelists are Olympic coaches. So truly honored and blessed to have them part of it. So please do join us on our next Real Talk, July 22nd. And with that, I thank you all again and have a wonderful, blessed day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.